All right, Darren Smith, it is San Diego Sports Leader. It is the Mighty 1090 as we get set. We got a little bit of downtime between now and the Super Bowl, obviously, but we talked a little bit yesterday about San Diego State. Not the best week we've seen in recent memory from San Diego State. And joining us, as he always does, is associate head coach in waiting. He is Brian Dutcher via the Western Exterminator Hotline. Coach, good to talk to you as always. Thank you very much for the time.
Good to be back with you, Darren.
I appreciate it. I just mentioned, I feel a little bit, since we've been covering, since you guys have gone on this recent run of success here, we haven't had a lot of weeks like this where we've talked about multiple losses. I had to go back and look it up. I mean, last year you guys lose 3 conference games in a row, and you end up bouncing back. But it seems like this is like an unusual place to be for the San Diego State basketball team.
Yeah, we're not used to losing back-to-back games, Darren. It was very frustrating. I thought we played pretty well at Vegas in stretches and had chances that went down to the last 2 or 3 possessions. But Wyoming was frustrating because it never felt like we were in the game. We scored 9 first-half points, looking uphill the entire game, and it was just very frustrating. With that being said, people also have to realize that Wyoming is 15-2, and one of their losses was a buzzer beater, a deep 3 by Boise. So they could easily be sitting 16-1, and we have to realize we didn't play well, but Wyoming had a lot to do with that.
Well, is there a common denominator between the two games? Sometimes you say, well, okay, we didn't do this really well this week. Was there a common denominator from the Rebels game and then going up to Wyoming?
They were so different that it's hard to tell. I mean, Vegas, we had multiple possessions, up and down. It was a scoring fest, whereas Wyoming, if you're not making shots against them, they'll run 35 seconds of possession. If you foul them, they'll run another 35. And so the frustrating thing in a game like that is your kids think there's a 14-point play. They're trying to get all those point backs in one possession. And so even though on film it wasn't as bad as we thought, I thought maybe there were a couple quick shots we were taking to try to force our way back into the game.
I think you just see the way the conference is going to be. We all had a chance to watch Vegas play on Wednesday night, those of us that were there live and those of us that watched it on television here in San Diego. And then you go, wow, that really looks like they might be the team to beat in the conference. And then they go and they lose on the road the following weekend. That got overlooked because you guys went on the road and lost. But then Vegas loses. So I just get the sense it's going to be that kind of year in the Mountain West Conference.
Yeah, Vegas loses a close game at New Mexico to start. They beat Air Force in overtime at home. They win a close game against us, and then they go lose a close game at Colorado State. These games are just going to be a test every night, and the fans have to understand that this is not the bottom of the Mountain West where you're going to pick up easy wins. This is a competitive league. This is what you all hope for. This is how you get multiple teams into the NCAA tournament when you have a lot of good teams, and there are a lot of good teams in this conference this year.
Right. In other words, nobody's going 32-2 in this conference this year.
Not that I can imagine. The only team that has a chance is New Mexico. They're undefeated, but they've got Colorado State at home, I think Wednesday night, and that will be a test for both teams. Both teams are very good, and then they come to us on Saturday. So it's going to be a dogfight every time you go out this year.
We're talking to Brian Dutcher, associate head coach, San Diego State. Aztecs playing on the road tomorrow night at Nevada. It's going to be their first trip going to Nevada. One thing that does stand out to me, just looking at the box scores from the last 2 games, 4 assists per game. How do you improve on that?
Well, you got to make shots.
Yeah.
When you're only getting 9 points, there are not a lot of assists to be had. So, I mean, we had some open looks that we weren't making, and it sounds like it's simplistic, but if we make a couple of these open threes, then the whole game changes. But when you're missing shots, it just puts so much more pressure on your defense. The next shot is harder to make. So when that dam bursts, like it did against Colorado State, when we made every 3 we took, then everything's great. But when you're missing shots and you're putting so much more pressure on your defense to get stops to stay in a game, it's a very frustrating and difficult game. And obviously, it's simplistic to say all you got to do is make shots. We know that, but it's a lot harder to do than it sounds.
I've been asked this week about Xavier Thames and about whether or not he is that important to your offense, being in that sort of rhythm. You just talked about having to make the shots when they present themselves. So I'll turn that question over to you. How important is X to your guys' offense?
You're talking about our starting point guard, and so it's like taking the quarterback out of the lineup. And Winston has done a great job at filling in, but Winston's a freshman, his first time through the battles. And so he played great against Fresno. He played really well against Vegas. He struggled some against Wyoming. And to lose your quarterback in Xavier, it definitely hurts, not only offensively, but Xavier's our best defensive guard. He takes the other team's point guard. He keeps them out of the paint. And so, yeah, we miss X, but everybody deals with injuries. Everybody deals with adversity. And so we'll be grateful when we get him back. But if we don't have them, it's no excuse not to perform.
When I think about your team for the last, since this run that you guys have been on for the last couple of years, I think about guys like Heath. I think about guys like Shelton last year, about DJ Gay. Maybe not your best players, but certainly the player who I would look at from the outside and say, that guy seems to me to be the leader inside the locker room. Who is that guy? I mean, if there's somebody that's cut from that cloth, who would you identify that person to be?
I think the vocal leader of the team is Jamal. We have a lot of guys that lead by example, but Jamal seems to take losing the hardest. He's the most upset. He voices that we have to do more, we have to pay a higher price, and he seems to be the vocal leader. With that being said, all our guys realize that. They're putting great effort into practice. We're working to get better, but as far as a vocal leadership, I'd say Jamal provides that.
See, I would have guessed Tapley, and I don't know that he's not that guy, but that would have been my guess, and I guess maybe it's just because he's been quoted. Since you're not in the top 25 anymore in the AP top 25, he said, hey, we need to look in the mirror. Maybe we needed this to wake us up to a certain extent. Does he have a point there? I mean, maybe these two losses this week, maybe that's somehow a good thing in the long run.
Well, it definitely gets their attention more. I mean, when you win, they're going to listen, obviously, like all good teams do. They're going to get better, but there's not the sense of urgency there is with a loss. The urgency level goes up, and the thing is we can't overreact to it. We've got to get better. We know that. There are things we need to work on, but you can't hit the panic mode. It's a long season. I remember last year when we lost at Air Force, we had thought we had lost the conference title. We had no chance to get back in it. And then 2 weeks later, we're cutting down nets for conference champs. So there's no need to overreact to the situation, but there's definitely a need to work on things.
What was going on at halftime of the Wyoming game?
Frustration, obviously. When you scored 9 points, that's an all-time low. And so it was trying to get beyond the frustration and saying, in reality, we're only down 11 points because they only had 20. So our defense was pretty good to hold them to 20, but we only had 9. So we were still in the game. We tried to make that point, but the closest we got, I think, was 7 points. We could not get over the hump and get it to where it was a 4-point game where they felt a little heat. I think they were comfortably ahead, and when you're ahead, things are always a little easier.
You ever been a part of a game where 9 points is scored in a half?
No. There were times we used to play Air Force when they held the ball that I didn't know if we were going to get to 9.5. But we always seemed to maybe get to 11, 14, 18. So even though Wyoming isn't Air Force offensively, they don't run the Prince of offense, they're extremely patient, and they know when they get a lead, they're going to make you guard an extended amount of time. So Coach Scheid, in that regard, did a great job. So everyone talks about Wyoming's defense. They hold their opponents to such low points, but a lot of that is the product of their offense, that they're being very, very patient.
And I'm going to assume, just based on what you said a little bit earlier, you don't think Wyoming's frauds at all. They're here to stay. You think they're going to be around for a while?
Yeah. This year, obviously, I mean, they've got Leonard Washington as one of the finest players in the conference, a fifth-year senior, and he was a monster in there against us. And so with him in there, they have a potential first-team all-conference player that played extremely well. So Larry's done a good job with that team. He lost a kid, Martinez,
right,
to an off-campus problem, and he's done a good job replacing him with another very good shooter. And like I said, people, they think of Wyoming, and they think of last year or the year before was Wyoming. Well, how could they lose to Wyoming? And then when you say, well, San Diego State lost to a 15-2 team, then you're thinking, well, that team must be pretty good. And then they beat us on their home floor. So that's no excuse for our performance, but it wasn't like we were playing a bad team.
All right, now that it was officially announced, Coach, let me ask you your thoughts about knowing for sure now that you guys are going to be staying in the Mountain West Conference. And, of course, this obviously affects you in your current capacity. This affects you in your future capacity when you do take over as a head coach here. How do you feel now that it's all done and everybody knows where you're going to be once and for all? How does it feel to know you're going to be back in this Mountain West Conference for a long time?
It feels good, Darren. I mean, this has been a great conference for the Aztecs. This is where we've made our run, where we've made our name as a basketball program, as a football program, and we're excited to stay. With that being said, we had great faith in President Hirschman and Jim Sturk to make the right decision for all our programs. And so if they felt it was in our best interest to leave, we'd have supported that and moved on with basketball. But it feels good to be back to something we know, to be back to a conference that we've been in our entire time here, Coach Fisher and me, for 14, 15 years. So it feels good to remain in the Mountain West.
And lastly, you guys are going to a place that you've never – I don't think you've coached before, and certainly not in conference. You're going to Nevada. Is there anything different about this trip? Is there anything differently that you'll do to get accustomed to the gym, to the sites, to the sight lines? Because you don't know this place like you might know New Mexico or UNLV or Colorado State.
No, there's going to be some apprehension because there's no comfort level there. Usually when you're in a conference for so long and the coaches remain, you have play calls, you know how they play, you know what their weaknesses and strengths are. And so we've watched a lot of tape. We think we've got a handle on Nevada, but being it's the first time through there for everybody, there'll be some apprehension as to what it's really going to be like until we get there.
Nevada and then New Mexico on Saturday. I'm going to assume, just based on the way last week went, we don't have to worry about this being a trap game. No room for trap games here or games that you overlook with New Mexico on the horizon.
No, I don't think we have to worry about that. We will bring all our energy and effort to Reno on Wednesday, and we're going to try to find a way to get off this losing streak and start a nice long winning streak.
Coach, a pleasure. Safe travels. Thank you very much for the time.
Thanks, Darren.